So, Maura, thanks for speaking with us. Maybe you can help us understand, who is Maura O'Leary Hunter?
I was born in the end of the 40s in rural Ireland, the eldest of 5 children. My father was a creamery manager, and we moved from North Cork, where I had gone to a very traditional one-building national school, 3 classes in 1 room kind of thing, and where we had a lot of emphasis on the Irish language. So my Irish language was probably stronger than my English language at that point. When I was about 10, we moved to East Cork, which was considered a big fishing town at the time, of Youghal, and on to Middleton, because of my father's profession. In fact, he was moving up the ladder as a creamery manager. He later on became very much involved in the Irish dairy industry. In fact, he represented Ireland on the Irish Dairy Board. So our background was maybe a little bit less conservative than many Irish people for that reason.
Okay. And why did you come to Germany?
Again, if I go back to my father, but I presume we're all influenced by our parents in some way or other, because he travelled quite a lot, which in times when people didn't really travel in Ireland. People travelled in Ireland back in those days only if they had to leave the country or emigrate for financial reasons. Whereas my father was one of the few people back in those days who managed to travel, again, as I said, representing the Irish Dairy Board. He was in countries like Denmark and regularly in Paris and Brussels and Italy and so on and so forth. And even later on, places like India and Australia, also representing the Irish Dairy Board. So as very young children, we were always kind of conscious that there was a world outside our little county or our little country, and this always intrigued me, and I always wanted to see some of it for myself. Okay,
and why did you come straight to Germany after school, or what did you do beforehand?
No, after school I did what was called a commercial course, which was a basic qualification to become a bank employee, and I became an employee in the Bank of Ireland in Ireland. And that again, I've got to go back to this because this is part of my reason for moving here. I was again in a very, very conservative establishment. It was, as I think we've discussed previously, back in those days a woman had to leave the Bank of Ireland if they got married. And also there was no potential for women, or very, very little. I was a trailblazer. I was the first woman cashier. This was a big deal. I mean, a woman standing behind the cash desk in a bank. It's hard to imagine something like that in this day and age, but obviously that was the way it was. And there was very little potential, as I said, for people to advance themselves, as a woman particularly. Then I had an opportunity through the bank. They had no personal department or something like that, and offered a scholarship for 3 employees to study psychology. And I was one of the people who won one of those scholarships. But it transpired I couldn't take it up immediately because I hadn't the proper qualifications for university. I didn't have Latin. However, if I were a mature student, which meant if I were 23, I could take it up. So I decided I would take a break and go to Germany and learn a language in between, because I was quite ambitious at the time. So I figured I was going to learn German in 9 months. Nearly 30 years later, I'm still learning it.
And so when you came to Germany, did you only learn German, or were you also working in some sort of form?
I was working. I mean, initially you had to work to support yourself. I came to Munich, actually, interestingly, in 1972, which was, of course, a very exciting year in Munich. It was the Olympic year. So I think I thought I was going to be an Olympic hostess or something like that, but it didn't transpire like that. I worked in all sorts of, I worked in restaurants and hotels and so on and so forth until my language was a little bit better. But at that stage, my only reason for working was to earn enough money to travel a bit and just to see as much as possible. Munich, of course, being the most amazingly central point in all of Europe. So it was possible to travel very, very easily, especially for people like us in Ireland who had to take a flight to leave the country. You could get in a car, or you could hitch a lift to Austria or Switzerland or France and so on and so forth. So that was my main reason for picking Munich.
Okay. And when and why did you open up this shop?
My background being banking, when I came to Munich, when I decided I was going to stay in Munich, that I really loved the less conservative setup here. Although I have to say, Bavaria is also conservative Catholic. It wasn't a big change, but in some ways from Ireland. However, it was a big difference for us. And I decided I was going to stay here, so I decided I better do something in that line. I mean, my background was finance, so I got a position at an American stock brokerage, and there I was able to take my exams. So I took my brokerage exams, which were done by correspondence course, but the exams were taken in New York and Paris and Heidelberg and so on. And that was a period of 2 or 3 years working and studying at the same time. And then I was a qualified certified broker for the American Stock Exchange, and I worked as a stockbroker. In fact, I was vice president of the big company of Dean Witter here for many years. So I had a big background in finance. And why I stopped that was partly because it was the time for example, I had lived through the crash, the market crash of of 89 in October. I'd gone through all of that with all the trauma of a lot of my customers losing a lot of money and so on and so forth, and fortunately surviving it myself. I was coming up to 40, or I was around 40, and it was a very it was a very stressful job. I was working day and night. I mean, I traded currencies across the world. So because of the time difference with the United States, the stock markets opened after 2 at our time, and I worked until midnight or later. Sometimes I worked through the whole night. The banks, who were my customers, went home and went to bed and left me in charge of their positions, which had to be hedged in New York or whatever. So it was a full-time job, and it was a very stressful job. And even though I loved it, I absolutely loved it, a point came when I thought, okay, this can't go on forever. You know, you're going to maybe suffer from burnout at some stage. However, the decision was made a little bit more easily for me because the company I worked for, Dean Witter, decided from Monday to the next to close all of their European offices, all of them. And even though I could have moved to the next one straight away, in fact, I was headhunted to the next one. For a lot of reasons, I decided, okay, maybe it's time to take a break and think where you go next. Also, at the time, I had a young child, and my husband and I thought I should possibly do a little bit of parenting.
Okay,
yeah.
So this shop is a really beautiful reminder of Ireland, and it's very peaceful and serenic.
Yeah.
It seems a long way from stockbroking.
Yeah. Initially, when I started off, it was a huge change, and it wasn't even easy for me, I would say. I was used to trading in intangibles and, you know, talking big finance and so on and so forth. And all of a sudden, I was here talking to the lady from the street and advising them on whether their pullover suited them or whether the colour was right for their eyes and stuff like that. And I really felt like I was playing with my son. It was like being, playing shop or something like that. So for a while, I thought, who is this person? What voice is that? Who is this person? However, I gradually came to realise that Ireland has another facet of which I wasn't aware. I mean, everybody knows, the pub scene and the music scene, but a lot of people don't know that Ireland has got a wonderful heritage of craftsmanship. I mean, amazing crafts, amazing patterns, amazing eye for colour. And as I slowly became aware of that, I became more intrigued by it, and so that I got quite taken up in it. And after maybe a year or so, maybe it took me a while to get to know this business because I hadn't learned it. First of all, I got to learn the suppliers and who told me and explained me how all of these things were done and how old these crafts were. And I watched weavers, weaving these cloths, and I saw the combinations they were taking and their desire to put colours together. And I became intrigued absolutely by that. So I felt very, very proud to present these wonderful high-class products to my German customers.
Fantastic. And over the last 20 years, what have been some of the most interesting and amazing moments you've had here?
I've had funny moments. For example, because I'm the only Irish shop in Munich, there's a need sometimes for people who are doing theatre or film work to have conservative clothing like traditional tweed jackets or trousers or hand-knitted sweaters and so on. These are necessary, obviously, for theatre very often. A lot of the plays which are put on here are English language plays, whether it's, Shaw or whatever, or so on, whatever. So people come in from the theatre world, and it's quite exciting to see them hopping around and putting pieces together and choosing them. But besides that, they often bring the actors or actresses in here. So I've had a lot of famous actors and actresses here in the shop. Funnily, very often I didn't even know who they were. And this was I had quite an amusing time once. I had a young actor in here whom I didn't know because I don't really watch that awful amount of German television. And he was choosing some things, and he took a long time, and I gave him the same support that I give to any customer. And as he went out the door, I realised there were a group of young girls outside the door, and they all circled around him and looked for his autograph. So I thought, who was this? So when he had gone, I went out and I said, who was that? And they said, you didn't know him, oh my God! So these kind of things are funny.
Do you remember who he was?
He was Eisenstein, I think he was called. Yeah, exactly. So these kind of things are funny, that I've got these famous customers here and I don't know who they are, and everyone's saying, oh my God, you're serving these amazing people. However, that being said, I also had quite a few well-known actors and actresses here in the shop, and that's rather interesting. And also it's rather charming to realise that your clothing that you rent out, I sometimes rent it out to theatres and stuff like that, or rent it out for film, to realise that these things are actually being used and as promotion. And it's also promoting Ireland, not promoting Irish shop, but promoting Ireland here.
Ireland.
Yeah.
And from the actors to the normal person on the street, is there a difference between your German customers and your Irish customers?
David, that's a difficult question to answer because I don't have many Irish customers here. My customers, I would say, are 95% German and quite a few French and Italians as well, I would say, and some Americans. Not so many Irish, because Irish people tend to go home, and if they want something like an Aran sweater, which is considered typically Irish, they will buy it at home, or they will get it cheaper at home, possibly, or they think they will get it cheaper at home, which is not necessarily the case. Irish people who come to shop here are usually looking for a present for somebody, like a bottle of whiskey or a claddagh ring or something for a new baby, and they want something typically Irish, and they come in for things like that, and they usually have a good idea what they're looking for. So they usually need less service than, for example, Germans. But the main difference, I would say, between Irish people and Germans are that Irish are very adventurous. Again, going back to this colour thing, Irish are very adventurous, and if they see something that they like, they want to have it. Whereas a German will have to find out if it suits them, and they're much more aware of if it's flattering and if it suits them, rather than, oh, this is something you have never seen before, or wow, what a wonderful colour. They are much more conservative and much more maybe sensible, of course. Irish people are still a little bit in the, also like British people, a little bit in the, you know, the idea of you buy it today and you wear it for a couple of months and then you buy something else, whereas Germans are long-term planners and more sensible, and they buy good quality. They're more interested in good quality, which is of course what you get from Ireland. Irish people just want something that looks good. Okay. Whereas Germans are really, really into quality. That's the most important thing. The first thing they do is look at the labels and make sure it's pure wool. And one of my great advantages here that I can say to them, everything in this shop, everything I have here is pure wool. There are no mixtures of synthetics in them, and this you don't get in any shops at the moment at all. And besides that, I also place a lot of emphasis on the fact that everything in the shop is made not necessarily in Ireland, but everything is made in Europe. So there's no cheap labour from China or something like that in here. And in the meantime, the very nice thing is that a lot of people, even young people, ask, where is this product made? And I think that's really, really great that young people as well as older people are beginning to realise we can't exploit people in Asia and so on and so forth.
Well, that's good news. And you have your interesting background from banking, stockbroking, and into retail. What advice, if any, would you give someone starting a shop or starting a business in Germany?
Are you talking about an Irish person or anybody? Anybody?
Well, both.
Both. Well, I would say for an Irish person, the first thing is be sure to consult other Irish people who've been here before you and have some experience, because there are quite a few pitfalls. I mean, the laws here are quite different. There are a lot of small regulations which we would ignore in Ireland and which are very, very important here, and you can really land yourself in the soup for unnecessary reasons. So the first thing I would say is get in touch with people like the Irish Business Network and say, where are the pitfalls, get some information, go to the Industry and Handelskammer, which is very helpful, and get information in that direction. But I also would say you don't have to have perfect German, but you certainly need a working knowledge of German, because you have an awful lot of contact with authorities and so on and so forth, a lot more than people think. So I certainly think you need to be able to express yourself in German, but more importantly, you need to understand what's going on and be able to read documents before you sign them. And so, as I said, people should not be shy about asking other people for information and say, what are your experiences? Give me some advice. If you're opening a shop, you really need to say to somebody, what sells, what doesn't sell. For example, when I started off, I had no background in shopping or being a shopkeeper. I went to Ireland and I went into the tourist shops in Ireland and I followed German people through those shops, and I looked at what they were buying, checked out the suppliers and got in contact with the suppliers. Now, through that I made some mistakes, because people who are tourists in Ireland buy completely different products from what they do if they're on the spot. In Ireland, tourists buy souvenirs, which remind them of where they were on holidays, or they buy pottery, which they don't buy at all here. So I thought this is very clever, just follow the Germans around and you've got it all sewn up. It's not as simple as that. You've got to put yourself, you've got, for example, if you're Irish, you have got to place yourself in Ireland and then move yourself out of Ireland and put yourself into a German surrounding and say, well, what would Frau Meyer think of that? Would she be as enthusiastic as you are? And be humble and take other people's opinion, and but most importantly, be authentic and use your Irishness as a sales point, and use it as use your Irish charm. That's what people want.
Okay, well, I mean, all my feedback to you can only be you're a very authentic person. It's always a pleasure to meet you, and this is an amazing environment you've set up. So I'd like to thank you for taking the time to speak to us.
I'm delighted to, as I said, I'm proud to represent Ireland here in Munich.
Thank you, Maura.
Thank you, David.